to. My name's Earl. I'm one of the pastors here at 360, along with my wife Jan and Jeff, who you have already met. Welcome to you if you're joining us online or you're actually here in person today. It's great to have you with us, and we wish you all a very happy Mother's Day. My mom is back in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania today, so I'm going to call her later and wish her well. I'm very far from her. I'm from a city where no one ever leaves, so I'm the black sheep in my family. As we would say in my culture, I have escaped from the east and live here on the coast, and everybody thinks I'm crazy. But here I am, and I love it, and we'll reach back to her and say hello today. You know, the most popular class at the University of California is Physics C10. It's called Physics for Future Presidents. And in fact, this is so famous that if you go online and you're a physics or technology prof at another school, there's actually a website that will empower you to teach the same material at your university so you can be famous too. Students were surveyed at Cal. The latest that I came across was about 2008, and they said, absolutely, this is the best class. And there is both a popular level and a technical level book written for it, only one of which, the latter, of course, is the text. And the notion is very simple, that when you begin your administration in the White House, there are just certain things you've got to know. You've got to know about climate change. You've got to know about nuclear weapons. You've got to know how to jumpstart a car. You just have to know things about how the world works, or you're going to be a very bad president. And so this class is thronged with students because aspiration is high at our university. People easily see themselves in the Oval Office, and of course this is the kind of class that you want to have. Now, every president enters the White House with one conviction, and that conviction is, I know more about what the country should do than the person who came before me. The notion that I'm superior to my predecessor, which is a very American way to think about things. And then once you're actually in the role for just a few minutes, you realize you're not so smart. And that the problems are much bigger than you thought, and everything is much more complicated than you realized, that you're really only one cog in a much larger machine. And so what American presidents have done, beginning at the inauguration of Dwight Eisenhower, where or two of them at a time to talk about the issues of the day and how they are so much bigger than my abilities have turned out to be once I sit behind this desk in the Oval Office. And so they get advice about war and peace, about trade negotiations, and about all of the other complicated issues that an American chief executive has to worry about, because really when you are Barack Obama, whose shoulder do you cry on? Your peer group is so small that the only other people you can reach out to really are other people who have had the same role. So it seemed to me that if there are certain things you really need to know to be president, and once you know those things and you arrive at the office, you still need a group of peers having in your power the American military establishment and all of the other powers of the chief executives. Maybe being in a group of our peers is something we should think about too. Perhaps that would be pretty good. Early followers of Jesus did. And what happened was Jesus told those who would be in the city of Jerusalem just a few weeks after his resurrection, don't go anywhere until power has come from heaven. And once you've been filled with this power, then you'll be ready to go out and tell people about what's been accomplished in my death on the cross and my resurrection. So they gathered together in a big prayer meeting, about 120 people in an upper room, and prayed, men and women together, waiting for this. I mean, no one had ever seen it. They didn't know what was coming. They were just waiting That's all language that would come later. And then on the day of Pentecost, the Spirit of God falls on them, and there are signs like the sound of a rushing wind, and they see things that look like tongues of fire, and they're filled with the power of God's Spirit in such a powerful way that the Bible compares it to being baptized, being immersed, being overflowed, and they speak in languages that were not vernacular to them. And the city being filled with religious tourists for the high Jewish holidays hears the commotion. The party spills out into the street, and that's trouble. Some of the tourists say, everybody's loaded. Here we are at frat row, and this is frat conduct. What we've got here are these people are drunk. Others say, no, it's 9 o'clock in the morning. The first group says, you don't know Berkeley. Anything's possible 24 hours a day. And others say, what is this all about? What does this mean? And so Peter, the most influential person, stands up and says, all right, here's what's going on. And starting with the Jewish prophet Joel, he explains that this coming of the power of God's Spirit upon followers of the Messiah had been predicted long ago in the Jewish scriptures. And then he tells the entire story of the travels of the Jewish people to Palestine, the slavery in Egypt. And his final argument is this: if someone as famous as David, the king, who was our leading historical celebrity, if at the end of his reign he dies and goes into the grave and is no more, and that's the best we can do in our own human strength, how great is Jesus, who dies but then rises from the dead? And hearing that, the devout people gathered around him, a large crowd. The Bible records their hearts, it's almost like being surgically cut open. Everything about them is revealed, and they cry out, what should we do? What should we do? And Peter tells them, you need to repent, that is to turn away from everything you've depended on in the past. Throw yourself on the mercy of God by believing in what Jesus has accomplished for you on the cross, in the forgiveness of sin and resurrection with God your Father. And come and be baptized. In other words, join this community, our little band of 120. And they agreed to do so. And the scripture records that 3,000 of them agreed to do so. Which forces the issue, what's the plan? 3,000 people have arrived at your doorstep, said, oh, okay, we're in. That's a lot of ramen noodles. What are you going to do with these people? How are you going to form them into something? This is a stadium full of folks. They're all from all different parts of the Roman Empire, the Mediterranean basin. They're Jewish, but they speak all sorts of different languages. That's what they recognized in this very loud outpouring that takes place. And they're just standing there going, okay. Now I can imagine Peter in the meeting that takes place afterwards. What are we going to do? And so their plan is given to us in Acts 2, verse 42. On your handout, that's the part that's italicized. Speaking of their immediate reaction, and they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and prayers. And awe, or some translations say fear, came upon every soul. And many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles. And all who believed were together and had all things in common, and they were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds to all, as any had need. And day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they received their food with gladness and generous hearts, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved. Now, people approach this passage from a couple of perspectives. When they notice especially the importance of meeting in homes, which seems to have been the major plan that the leaders adopted. We're going to meet in a big group at the temple because there's a big paved open area there, and we're also going to meet from house to house, and we're going to eat every single time we have a chance. That's the plan.
Right.
And that's the plan for future presidents too. So some people look at the passage and say it's just a culture thing. After all, the home is the center of culture in this region at this time, and so if people are coming to faith, well, of course they meet in homes because that's what everything was done that way. If the story had taken place in Tokyo, it might be about sushi restaurants. It just is completely culture bound, so just flow by it and do what you need to do. I have other friends who say, no, that's wrong. This is absolutely a command thing. What the Bible describes, it prescribes in their point of view. And I have many friends who would say that what we're doing today, a Sunday morning experience, is a dinosaur. It needs to be discontinued, that the Romans ruined the church when they made Christianity the official religion. And what we need to do is have everything take place in living rooms in order to be valid. And they point to the experience of the house church movement around the world as evidence for that. I have a lot of friends that don't speak to each other much. They kind of come from so totally different points of view. I think everybody needs to just take a little bit of a chill pill here on interpreting this passage. I'm not really sure that a first century physician who loves Jesus really writes in terms of organizational theory. That's a modern category, if not an ancient category. And so I think, to me, the most important word is the last word in the passage. You'll see it right at the end of your handout, saved. This is not so much a description of a ministry paradigm as it is a description of what saved people do. Look at the key words: devoted, results in fruits like this. Honestly, if things like this can happen among us, I don't care if we all come in here and hang upside down like bats. If this is how we live once we leave, what difference does it make? And so Luke's describing the product of meeting number one. Let's get together in homes and also in big groups. And that's the plan. Future presidents need home groups. Maybe the main reason for that in our context today is that this is Mother's Day and your mom really wants this for you. I mean, when you call your mom, what does she ask you? How are you? Are you getting enough to eat? What did you have for lunch today? I see. Are you skipping the desserts? Are all your bills paid? Do you have friends or the people that you can hang out with? Is there laundry, or are you saving it all for spring break again? You know, your mom's concerned for your welfare, isn't she? She's concerned with whether you're woven into the fabric of the community that you're a part of. If there's anybody that would vote for you being part of a home group, it's going to be your mom. So please make your mom happy. And at the end of today's talk, take a communication card, put your info on it, and just write home group or 360 homes or future president or something like that on it, and leave it on your seat. Was in 1978. Jimmy Carter was the president. The Iranian hostage crisis is what that year is famous for. I was in graduate school at Northwestern near Chicago, Illinois, and we were invited to open our house to host a home group for a church that had never had them before, which you could tell that because they picked us. We had never led one, we had never seen one. And we were not only supposed to host it, we were also supposed to be the teacher. So, you know, under pressure, you go to your default position, what's really you. And so Janet began to cook and just making huge amounts of comfort food, and I began to study to prepare Bible lessons for the home group with topics like 29 important aspects of Ephesians chapter 1, verse 1. Getting these things ready, and we opened up our house just based on an announcement from the pulpit and in the bulletin like this, and people began to come over, a few people, and we would do what they did there. We would study the apostles' teaching, the person of Christ. We would share we would break bread and spaghetti and pretzels and potato chips together, and we would serve, and we would fellowship and just kind of spend time together. And we began to notice that they were staying longer and longer and longer and longer. So this was Friday nights. It was the weekend, and people were staying until 10 and 11 and midnight, and the group started with a handful, and then there was 10, and then there were 15, and then there were 20, and before we knew it, we had a whole living room slammed full, even with folding chairs. The prayer request took half an hour because everybody was in so much pain that the prayer request was, you almost felt like saying, I'm sorry, your hour's up. They were just pouring out all of this hurt that was bottled up in a big group experience, a temple court experience, because you don't have a place to share that stuff in a big group, do you? You can't do it. And so I was watching this happen, doing my 29 aspects of Ephesians 1:1, and just wowing them with stuff like that. And the group was going along, and I was thinking to myself, oh no, I know what this is. I grew up in a pastor's home. This is not what I want from my life. I know what all of this is. Live hard, die broke, they get the next guy. Pastoring. This is never going to happen to me. Because I was the poster boy for cynical church kid. There's never been a church kid more cynical than I was until Jesus finally found me himself way, way back. And I end up in this, and I'm thinking, this is like being tied to the railroad tracks waiting for the train. This is no good. I want out of this. So once you get in a group setting, things start to come out of you that don't when you're alone. Gifts that might be resonant and dormant begin to become activated because you begin to engage people in a way that you don't otherwise, because now you start to get close after a little while, and you may think you're there to reveal things to them, but it turns out that they're a mirror that reveals things about you, and sometimes you go yay, and sometimes you go dang, because it's not really what you wanted. If you're going to be a future president, you need to know what's in there. And the best way to find out what's in there is to get with some other people who share the same goal. Well, grad school ended. If you're in grad school, I can assure you that it will end. And we went to our second home group experience. This one was in Vermont. It's now 1980, and Ronald Reagan is president. He was president for like 10 years and 50 years, forever. He was president a long time. So he's president, and all kinds of different things are now happening in the country. There's a recession again, and things are pretty wild. And we moved to the state of Vermont, where I'm going to take my first job as a university professor. And I find that I don't like my job very much. I'm very unhappy. And I find that my wife is extremely lonely and disconnected because we're in far off northern New England. No friends, no family, no support group. Because once you get out of graduate school and they spit you out the other end, you're doomed to the jobs available the month you graduate. You know, they tell you you've got all the jobs in the world to pick from, but it's not actually that way. Job one will be what's available. Really, there's a lot of good stuff on TV, there's sports, there's ESPN, there's all kinds of things to do. But she wanted to go so badly, she dragged me to this thing, kicking and screaming. You know how it is. If you're a married person, you whine and cry and complain the whole way in the car, and then when you show up and the doorbell rings, you brighten up and put Mr. Smiley face, and everything's fine, and we're so glad to be here. That's I shouldn't tell you this, that's marriage. It's one of the secrets of marriage. And so we go into this place, and the group is down in the basement, which means there's no escape at all. We're in this pit with low and dark, and this is New England, and it's cold. There's probably a driving rain. rain. At least it makes the story better. And we're down in the bottom, and we're talking, we're chatting, and it's off the awkward scale. I mean, it's out past the red zone on awkward and way out here, because all these people have history with each other, because no one ever moves out of New England. They've all come up together, and we're the interlopers, and we've just arrived from a grad school in the Big Ten, which is like Mars, where we are now, and we're in this brand new community, and it's terrible. And just as the awkwardness reaches its peak, someone comes into the room and announces that a child has been murdered in our city. Now, it's a very small place, so to have a horrific crime like this is incredibly unusual, and it just lands in the room like a hammer blow. And of course, all the parents in the room have got kids. They start, you think, oh man, that could be my family. And it's one that just, the crime took place in a really unbelievably awful way, committed by another minor. It was a once in a lifetime kind of experience that community probably would never see again and had never seen since. But on that particular night, we just got that word of this terrible thing happening, and I saw people cry and grieve and care. And what they showed me is this isn't a movie. You know what we're walking through day to day? It's not the Avengers. This is real. This is a live fire exercise. And no matter what our age is, none of us are going to get out of this alive. This is the real world. And I'll always be grateful that I was with that group of people the night that I saw that. Because I saw them, even though they weren't directly affected, wasn't directly touching anyone's family, even in our larger church circle, they gathered together, they put their arms around each other, they grieved together, they prayed together for the family, and we healed. And I saw in that group that there are times when in a house with a group of people you care about, you can get through something that you couldn't get through on your own. And if you're going to be a future president, you're going to need to be able to get through a lot of stuff. That experiment in home groups lasted only a few months. We transitioned pastors. It's now 1982. And we have a new pastor, and he has a new plan. That's the thing about new pastors. They really like new plans. His new plan was a highly organized, almost to the level of a penal system of a discipleship program. It was a cell-based concept, meeting on Wednesday nights, and just to show up at Wednesday night, you couldn't show up unless you had listened to a 60-minute audio presentation. Do you guys know what a cassette is? Have you ever seen one? They're in the Smithsonian. It's a small plastic box that holds sound. And you had to listen to a 60-minute audio cassette presentation and then do 5 days worth of homework with written answers to Bible study questions in this huge hardback green book about the size of 3 of your textbook, laid side by side, and then you could show up and you were eligible for the 90-minute study, prayer, fellowship, and sharing session that we would all spend together. And the idea here is we would grow spiritually, and then we would be qualified to be leaders. That was what it was all about. And there were 4 or 5 courses all laid back to back. Holy cow, man, it was college all over again. By the time you were ready to be a leader, you were 35 or something, or when you graduated from this course. And I realized something was not right with our group. We had one guy who was a milkman. Remember, we're in northern New England still, and he was so tired he slept through the entire thing every time. He physically couldn't keep his eyes open. Another guy just out of prison, he had issues, character issues, behavioral issues, not related to prison. I think those issues were what put him there, and now he's just out with the same stuff he was dragging around before. Another guy had massive chunks of the Bible memorized and couldn't get along with his wife. And I'm looking at this, and what I'm wondering is, what am I doing wrong? I mean, if leadership is everything, I must be the worst leader ever in the history of a small group. We're not even in a house. Thank God we're in the church where at least there's help if this all jumps off the rails. So I asked to see our senior pastor, who's still a close friend of mine, despite this event. After one of the Wednesday nights, and I said, Wayne, help me here. I'm totally fouling this up. What's going on? Why isn't my group working? I mean, it's so dysfunctional. I mean, Jerry Springer wouldn't have us on. I mean, I don't know what's the matter. And he says, well, I have to tell you something. When we were planning these things, we took everybody that we knew would be trouble and put them all in one group. And we made you the warden. I thought, well, this brings an entirely new meaning to cell group. Because now what we have is essentially relationship jail, and Janet and I are the jailers. So I said, thank you very much. We went back next Wednesday night, and we spent several months together, and you know, people started to grow. The guy with the issues kind of calmed down a little bit. There was no major violence between Mr. Bible Knowledge and his very meek, great, nice wife. Other people, the milkman, he became this dynamic leader even though he was asleep through the entire thing. I don't understand how God does anything God does. I really don't. And I got to the end of it and I thought, what this group says to me is you don't have to have perfect people to have some pretty great outcomes. Yeah, and if you're going to be a future president, you need to know that. We don't have to have ideal raw material to see God do some really dramatically wonderful things. And I think the best thing that was done in that group is what it did with us. That it forced us to grow up because we had to stretch and grow and develop to try to make this group into sort of a little bit of a family without insisting that they reach our standard of minimum quality before we would count you as worthy of being worked with. A future president is going to work with a lot of people who aren't perfect because that's pretty much everybody in the world. They're going to work with a lot of people that have a lot of issues, difficulties, but that doesn't mean it won't be great outcomes. We diminished that model after a little while, and we finally went to a fourth model, same pastor, new model. We discovered that the biggest church in the world was in Korea. And that Korean church had developed a model of cell groups, which was dramatically effective. And our pastor said, if people in Seoul can build the biggest church in the world using this model, we will simply take that model and bring it to Vermont. Vermonters and Koreans being really virtual twins culturally, and we'll just copy and paste it and slap it on our Vermonters, and they will respond likewise, and we will have a church of 1 million people here on the banks of Lake Champlain. We set up the whole thing. We trained for months. We bought books. We put the leaders through training, and then we trained the leaders who would train the leaders who would train the people. And once again, our house was selected to be the hosts for one of these groups. And on the very first night, dozens of people packed into our house. We probably had 25, 30, 40 people all just slammed into our house. And I thought to myself, this isn't a cell group, this is a church plant. We've started a new denomination here with all of these people, and they're all gathered together, and we start to execute the plan and the playbook. And we made 2 discoveries. One was that Lake Champlain and Seoul, Korea, really, there are a few differences. It's not exactly the same. In fact, as we went along, we began to realize it's not even a little bit the same. And so the model itself kind of began to spin down because it really was never a good fit for the culture that we had imported it into. But the dynamics it produced. During this time, Jan and I were in transition to becoming staff members at this church, which is a polite way of saying we were broke and unemployed. Our car was about to be repossessed. We were dirt poor, just making our rent. We were so poor we had no food. We went to a lake near our house to catch fish for protein. We grew a garden to have carbs. We were poor. We were below subsistence. And this is after